Good morning, grinders. Welcome to the DFS pregame show here on RotoGrinders. I'm Jordan Cooper, aka Blender HD. If you want to follow me on Twitter, and it's Tuesday, June 21st. It's the first day of summer, right? It's technically. I think it's technically the first day of summer. I think it's going to be 96 degrees here in Louisville, Kentucky. I think tomorrow's going to be 100. So it's hot out there. It's hot out there. The balls in baseball may be flying out today. Give me those thumbs ups on your way in the door. It helps us out a lot. My little box here. My little box. Give me those thumbs ups. I see you guys in the chat. Suki Singh here is early as usual. Good morning. Doug Montgomery, Matt Mears. Got a bunch of guys in there, right? You can always type in anything you want, ask whatever you want, do whatever you want in the YouTube chat. Hit that subscribe button. Hit the notification bell to know when we go live. We got a 13-game MLB slate today. They'll have that all covered for you on Grinders Live later today at 5 o'clock. 6:20 is crunch time, and that's with Kevin Roth. Roth may be on vacation or something, but I don't know. That it's a good week to go on vacation for Roth because I think it's just like it's not raining anywhere and it's hot as hell. So I don't even know if you're going to need a weather report today, but they'll be taking care of you leading up to lock for the baseball slate today. But yesterday we had 8-game baseball slate, and if you watched the show yesterday with me and James, I've been in this mode, okay, and it was on the Theory of DFS podcast. If you check that out, a recent episode came out yesterday, and the one before it that with the amount of offerings there are in the DFS space. I mean, people think, oh, DFS is going down. No, it's actually going up. Okay, there's more offerings. You should be focused more. I mean, I'm kind of like if you took my course, the Theory of DFS course, defining your edge and going after the best edges that you could have. Okay, so focusing more on that than on what everyone else is doing, what everyone else is playing. Now, in the large field contest, I typically gravitate towards back to the large field contest because those contests typically have the most casual players. No, it also has a lot of the serious players, but it's a field of 30,000, and they're easily 20% of the entries are practically dead for first place, based on how they're constructed, how low they're projected, how high they're owned, or something like that. That there's a humongous edge in the large field contests in every sport. The issue with that is realizing your edge, especially with the top heavy payouts. So the opponents that you're playing against are always going to be the biggest determinant of your edge, of your profitability. So in a large field GPP, it's about how many, and it's not about necessarily how many like pros are in the contest. It's how many bad players. Very similar to poker, right? In poker, you go to a 9-handed table and you could see 6 like of the greatest players in the world there. And then you see 2 people that are horrible. You could be an average player, right? A better than average player, not as good as the six best in the world, and make money in that game just off of the 2 people that are horrible. Okay, so people get so bogged down with, oh, that's I don't want to go against the pros or anything, right? It's like, no, you want to go against the weakest field possible. So that's why I tend to gravitate towards the large field contest, because that makes the most sense. It's hard to win those, right? Your expectation over a long period of time is positive, but you have to survive weeks, if not months, of losing in order to have that 150K finish, that 120K finish. Even if you're playing lower stakes, if you're playing the mini max or something, it takes a while. And then when you hit that, then you show a 30-40% profit, even though you've lost a whole bunch of times along the way. But that isn't just the edge. That in and of itself, your opponents being weak isn't the edge. Your opponents being predictable is an edge as well. So to relate it back to poker, and I used to play poker for a living. I made most of my money not off the worst players. I made most of my money off of average players based on my playing style, my strengths at the poker table. And I played mostly live, okay? My strengths at the poker table was reading hands of average players. How do average players play and exploiting their play? The worst players at the table, there's no point in exploiting their play. They don't even know how they're playing, right? So typically against the worst players at the table, you just value bet, right? Just make a good hand and bet. There's no deception really there because they don't even know it. They're not even considering your hand, and they don't even know what they're doing, right? So sometimes they think they have a good hand. You feel like they think they have a good hand, and actually they don't have a good hand. You have a hand that beats them. There are times where they think they have a weak hand, and they should be shoving in with it, and they're scared of something on the board or whatever. So like those really bad players, they kind of play. You typically just play straightforward. They'll wait to get a hand and get paid off, right? It's not that hard to do. But average players, very easy to manipulate bet sizes and no limit, especially, right? Get them to think one way and think the other. They think a certain way, you act like an average player and you manipulate them. So it's very easy to figure out it's very easy to narrow down their range of hands based on their betting actions, especially watching them for hours upon hours at a time. You profile them and it's like, okay, if I get check raised right here, I could just throw away this hand that no one else would have thrown away because I know what my opponent has. Like this person is not capable of doing this check raise bluff move, right? So that was my strength of value betting and knowing when to losing the least at the poker table, predicting other people's hands, especially average players. Now the good players, they mix up their play enough that you're constantly playing a game of chicken with them. Okay, I get that. But that dynamic exists in DFS. And I've mentioned it multiple times. It's just that I've always focused on the large field GPPs to go like, why don't I just go where I just need the value bet? Right? Okay, 20%, 25% of these lineups are over the rake. Why don't I just build plus EV lineups and just wait for the money to come? Right, yes, I'm going to be on prolonged downswings until I get a big blip, a big spike up. But maybe there's a better way. Maybe there are other edges out there that are as profitable, but take on less risk. Because to me, that's the holy grail. What's more profitable for less risk? And we talk about this 121 single entry contest on DraftKings for MLB. That is an exploitable contest because you can predict lineups, because ownership gets much more condensed than it should be, especially in a high variance sport like MLB. So we see here, I brought up in Results DB the $12 chin music because we don't have the 121 in here. I'll show you a little bit of the 121 over here. But if we take a look at the ownership, like if we go to the large field contest, like let's go to the mini max, which is the largest field, right? We go there and we take a look at the ownership. Garrett Cole, okay, outside of the pitchers, who are the least variant players in baseball. So just the batters. Trout at 30, Devers at 28, Taylor Ward at 19, Bogarts at 19, Moreno at 16, O'Neill Cruz at 15, Vlad at 15, Ohtani 14. Okay, you get those, okay? Now let's go to the $12 single entry, which is 2,800 entries compared to 58,000. Mike Trout was 46% owned. Rafael Devers was 44% owned. O'Neill Cruz, 29. Bogarts, 26. Moreno, 25. Ward, 24. Like they're way more owned in these contests. And the same thing for the 121. So obviously this contest is 2,800 entries. So it's not that small of a field. But the 121 is like 600 entries. And also the ownership in the 121 is very similar to cash ownership. Not as high, but if there's large field ownership, there's cash ownership. 121 leans a lot towards the double up, triple up type of ownership. And if you're building lineups like this, these lineups are very correlative to each other. Okay, so this is what I mentioned yesterday, and we have people in chat talking about this as well. Daniel says the dynamic you described for poker is strongest for limit games, limit Omaha 8 in particular. There's very little difference between a very good player and a world-class player if two fish are in the game. That's correct, right? They're talking about poker in here. Okay, so if you knew how people were building their lineups in baseball, especially. This may not be as true in basketball. It's going to be true, but not the effect isn't going to be as dramatic. Okay, this is my theory is correct. The extent in which you could exploit it, that's to me, that's what I'm trying to figure out. Because I know it's exploitable. Just that what is the best way to exploit it is what I'm trying to figure out. Okay. So in this contest, Mike Trout 46%, Rafael Devers 44%, O'Neal Cruz 29%, Gabriel Moreno 25%. Like, how many of these lineups have all of these players in it? Like, all of them. So most likely lineups that have Taylor Ward have Mike Trout in it because it's just purely of stacking. And lineups that have Devers and Bogarts are more likely to be together because of stacking. But if people are playing cash type lineups where they're not stacking as much and they're just throwing in their cash lineup, like Mike Trout, even if you just do product ownership, 0.46 for Trout, we're not counting the pitchers, 0.44 for Devers, right? Times O'Neal Cruz, right? 0.29. So those three players combined make up about 6% of all the lineups in this contest. And this is a 2,800 person contest. Okay, so 6%. I mean, this is a lot of lineups. Then you add someone like Gabriel Moreno at Taylor Ward or something, right? You put 0.24, right? With that down to like 1.4% of lineups have all of them in it. And this is the $12 single entry. So, like, if one, let's say between two, let's say just Trout and Devers, for instance. Let's make it very minimal. So Trout and Devers together, we should expect about 20% of lineups to have them both together. Well, what happens if one of them fails? Well, all the Devers lineups go down also because they're correlated with each other, right? If you have Trout, Devers, Garrett Cole, and O'Neal Cruz in your lineup, and let's say one of them gets a 0, well, that's a lot of Trout. That's a lot of lineups with Trout. Even if Trout got 17 points, well, a lot of those 17-point lineups have a 0 from one of these other guys. So, like, the only way that you really get killed by all of them is either by one outlier performance, like if Trout puts up 40, or they all smash. Other than that, you'd rather not be correlated with all of these players together. Can you have one of them? Sure. But should you have like 4 or 5 of them in your lineup? It would be much better from a relative value standpoint to not have that combination. And we could take a look here. I downloaded the 121, and I'm just looking at the most duplicated lineups. And the 121 is about like what, 600, 630 entries. So we take a look at a lineup that's duplicated 4 times. Cole, Darvish, Ohtani, Rengifo, Devers, Cruz, Moreno, Trout, Ward, Duran. 4 times. This was some optimal. This was an optimal around the industry. Now this lineup over here with McClanahan and Torkelson, I have no idea why it's duplicated 3 times. It is a Blue Jays stack. It is an Espinal, Chapman, Springer, Hernandez, or is it? It's a 4. No, it's not even a stack. So I don't know why that's duplicated 3 times. But then we have Cole, Darvish, Walsh, Rengifo, Ohtani, Trout, Ward. So this is the Angel stack. We can see here the primary stack shows here 3 times. Here's a lineup with Vogelbach and Whit Merrifield, Victor Reyes. This is 2 times. If I go down here, this Garrett Cole lineup right over here, Rengifo, Trout, Benintendi, Grossman. This was the bat optimal. So if you played this lineup over here, this was the bat optimal lineup. And I believe if I could find, okay, whoa, okay. I didn't realize they go off like that. I believe this, at Ortega, this was another site's optimal. If you used another site's projections, this was another optimal lineup, right? Because I think Abrams was in some, or this one, or Suzuki, Trout, Ward, Riley, Green. Yeah, I think this one. But it's very close to this one. Like, take a look how correlated these lineups are to each other. 4, 3, 3, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2. So just on this page, we have 7, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, 24, 20, and we go even further. 24, 26, 28, 30, 32, 34, 36, 38, 40, 42, 44. And we're still look at these lineups. Yeah, some of them have slightly different players like Darren Ruff or something, Matt Duffy. But we have a lot of Devers, a lot of Cruz, Trout, Ward, Grossman, Duran. We go to this one. Okay, now we got a two over here. So there's like out of all the lineups in the contest, there's 630 lineups in the contest or so. Like 44, 45 or so, which is like what? We're talking about like 8%. What's 45 divided by 630 or something? Right? Yeah, 7% of lineups are actually duplicated, which is horrible, obviously, in GPPs for a 630 person contest. But then we still go down to some of these other lineups, and we see so many, like Rafael, in this contest, I think Devers was like 56% owned. I think O'Neill Cruz was like 60% owned. I think Trout was 50+% owned. And all these lineups that have those players are typically together with one another. Okay? So we showed yesterday as far as how does duplication inside of your lineups affect the equity of your entry into a contest. Well, that's not just if you duplicate the whole lineup. That's also if you duplicate the combinations of the players. So if we go up here, right, we go up to, here's a Garrett, let's say, here's a lineup. Like how many of these Garrett Cole lineups, right, we don't have one up over here, have Rafael Devers in it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. How many of them have O'Neill Cruz in it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. How many of them have Moreno in it? Well, some have Moreno, some have Suzuki, some have Perez. How many have Trout in it? Like all of them, I think. I think all. No, this one doesn't. This one has Victor Reyes. This is a slightly weirder lineup. So how many have Taylor Ward in it? How many have? I mean, they're all correlated to each other. They're all 1v1s, 2v2s, or 3v3s, and the rest of the lineup looks exactly the same. Let me make sure to get rid of. We always get these spam porn bots in the channel. Get rid of those. So they don't bother you in the chat. Right. Daniel Hutchins says in the chat, in 121 battery, 14% of lineups had Cruz, Trout, and Devers. Right. 14% of lineups. So imagine avoiding that combination. Like you literally just exit out and build a better lineup. That lineup will project lower. Obviously, the reason why they're owned is because they project higher. But this is not basketball where one guy could project for so much higher that you lose like 10 points in projection by not playing that guy. If you would have crossed out yesterday, if you used the bat projections yesterday and you X'd out O'Neill Cruz and just built the next best lineup, you sacrificed less than 0.2 points. Less than point, I think it was 0.18 or something. If you just X'd out O'Neill Cruz. If you just X'd out Taylor Ward, you only dropped, I think, 0.3 in projection, in median projection. So if you dropped both of them, you're just sacrificing a half a point to not be on a correlated lineup. Now, when you drop Trout, you drop a 1.5 points with Trout, and you dropped about a point with Devers. So imagine not playing any of those guys. Imagine not playing. If you look at this contest, you disregard the pitchers. Pitchers are less varied. So I could understand being on the same pitchers. So to me, if you didn't play Cole, once you X'd out Cole, you actually dropped like 6 points in projection. So I can understand not wanting to drop 6 points in projection by not playing a player. But all these batters, like if you would have just X'd out Jarren Duran, Taylor Ward, Mike Trout, Gabriel Moreno, O'Neill Cruz, Rafael Devers, Joey Ohtani, if you would have or Rengifo, if you would have X'd out like all of them, the best lineup you could make would only be like maybe 4 points lower projected. 4, maybe 5. 4 or 5. And it wouldn't have any of these players. Like you'd have none of them. Like you'd end up with more Blue Jays in this. You'd probably end up with Springer, Teoscar. You'd end up with like Matt Chapman. You maybe Whit Merrifield, Benintendi. You get like Jared Walsh instead of Ohtani at first base. I mean, it's not like you're getting like 1% owned players, but you're getting different players that are not correlated with the lineups that are the most owned. So if you're playing, I mean, this is the 121. So like, let's say you're playing 3-mans, and you know what the other, and you know most likely what the other 2 lineups in your contest are going to look like. You don't want to be duplicated, and 3-mans being duplicated is the worst. If you have the same exact lineup, you basically destroyed yourself in a 3-man. 5-man, you pretty much destroyed yourself. So in a 3-man, if you don't want to duplicate at all with another person in a full lineup, why would you want to be a 1v1 also? A 1v1 is just above duplicating everything in the lineup. Wouldn't you rather be a 2v2? Wouldn't you rather be a 3v3? Wouldn't you rather be a 4v4? Wouldn't you rather be an 8v8? Wouldn't you rather be, especially if you know the other 2 lineups are going to be like a 2v2 or a 3v3 at best? Wouldn't you rather be an 8v8? Assuming that you could build a lineup that is a 6v6 or whatever, that is high enough projected that it will win the 3-man more than what, 33%? More, like, it doesn't have to be 33% of the time, and 30% of the time, something like that. Like, what is the projection difference? How often do you need to win? How often does the lineups, what's a better way of putting it? I'm trying to put it into the easiest way to understand. If you're playing, for instance, if player 1 is playing a lineup with 110 projection, player 2 is playing a lineup with 110 projection, and you're playing a lineup with 104 projection, how often do you beat the other 2 lineups when you know the other 2 lineups are correlated? Okay, so it's not, you're almost playing a semi head-to-head. So even though it's a 3-man and you're looking to win that with the rake, like more than 35 point whatever percent of the time, is it possible that when you win 30, that you could actually win at a higher rate only because the other 2 lineups are too correlated to each other? So if you were to simulate this out, this is something that probably Daniel could do, right? I think Nerdy Tenor is more equipped to do this than I am. I could possibly set this up. I may try. I may try in Excel to run the lineup. So even if you're just running a Monte Carlo on the players, because obviously that's not the best way to do it. To say, like, I'll go into my 3, because I checked my 3-mans on DraftKings and FanDuel yesterday, and it was pretty much my other 2 opponents had a 2v2. Now I wasn't different enough. I took it. I didn't take it enough to the extreme. That I think that was my fault yesterday. Would it have changed anything? No. I didn't do badly on FanDuel. I did pretty poorly on DraftKings. So I had angels. I had the different angels. I had Walsh and I didn't have Ward, and I didn't have O'Neal Cruz, right? Because I didn't play them because they were too correlated to each other. So yeah, so I didn't do well on DraftKings, but on FanDuel I had the Blue Jays and I did perfectly fine. But in a 3-man, in a 5-man, right, that pays out the top 2, like in those types of contests, in a 10-man that pays out the top 3. Like, if you knew, if I were able to tell you that in a 5-man, that what the other 4 lineups were, that, and they were all 2v2s of each other. So all of those 4 lineups that you're competing against are still unique lineups, but they're still just 2v2s. Like, it's one lineup is Gabriel Marino at catcher and Taylor Ward at outfielder and Corbin Burns at pitcher. But the next one is the same exact lineup, but it's Darvish at pitcher and it's Sal Perez at catcher and it's Robbie Grossman in outfield. So that's the 3v3. But everyone else you have Devers, you have Cruz, you have Trout, you have Ohtani, you got everyone else in the lineup the same. So like between those 4 lineups, essentially it's Cole Burns, Darvish, and then like Rengifo in one, and then Abrams in another, and O'Neal Cruz is in all 4 of those lineups. Mike Trout is in all 4 of the lineups. Rafael Devers is in all 4 of those lineups, and like everything is kind of like a 3v3 for all 4 of those lineups. And then you play a lineup that has doesn't have O'Neal Cruz, doesn't have Rafael Devers, doesn't have any of those, and it projects for like 5 or 6 points lower, like median wise. And then based on the fact that if for instance Rafael Devers does well and Mike Trout does well, like you come in 5th place in that contest. In the 3-man, you come in third place. Like, that's easy because you don't have either of those players, and all the other players in your contest have them. Well, what happens if Rafael Devers puts up a 0 and Mike Trout puts up a 0, and you're playing George Springer, who still projects well? It just so happens that he's in 0 of the lineups, like, because everyone's playing Trout, and you're playing Springer, and Springer has 16 points. Like, how often? And Springer had, who knows? Springer has 9 points. How often does your lineup? Because when your lineup beats out one of the 3v3s, it probably beats out a lot of the 3v3s because all of those lineups are correlated with each other. So is it quite possible that in 3-mans and 5-mans, if you knew what the likely lineups were going to be or look like somewhat, you may not know exactly, is it possible that you're kind of almost playing a modified head-to-head? That in fact, you're getting paid 3x or 5x on your money, but you're essentially kind of almost playing a head-to-head because most of the lineups that you're playing against are correlated with each other. So that, in theory, in my intuition, that makes some amount of sense. The question comes into, well, what's the lowest line? What's the lowest lineup that you'll accept that shows a profit in those scenarios? How much different do you need to be? Do you need to be somewhat different? Do you need to be do you need to be a 4v4? Like, if it's just the difference of everyone's a 3v3 and you're a 4v4, and that gives you profit like this, well, how much more profit if you're a 5v5? How much more profit than a 6v6, even though your projection goes down a little? Like, what is that barrier? How much projection are you willing to give up for that scenario? And simulating that out, and how often do you need to win in order to be profitable in those scenarios? Alex Santi says this is why 3 and 5-mans are more profitable than head-to-heads. Only reason to play the head-to-heads is for volume. Okay, I mean, I know Alex does this. I mean, that's why I've been looking into this more. Of like, yeah, I say this in theory, but why don't I just do it in practice? Especially in baseball, where a lot of people use the same projections, similar projection sources, where I could easily project the lineups now, because it's a high variance sport, where and on any given day, Bryce Harper could outscore Ronald Acuna. Where there's like on this 13-game slate, like, oh, everyone's going to play Judge or something, or like everyone plays Byron Buxton and you play someone else, Kyle Tucker. So like any of these guys could outscore. One guy could have a 0, one guy could have not 25 easily. In basketball, that doesn't happen, right? In basketball, it's not as likely as some random player going off. You could just switch out that easily. So that's what I'm attempting to do. Daniel Hutchings says, what you are describing is something I compute implicitly with my process. It's why you need to play uncorrelated lineups with different frequencies to avoid being exploited in very small contests. Okay. So I'm on the right track. Is Daniel you're telling me I'm on the right track? I'm on the right track. It's just, how do you accomplish it? So what I did yesterday, and I'll show you as an example in lineup HQ for today's slate, for instance. So let me reload this. Now, I'm not going to pull in projection sources that aren't RotoGrinders, but you can if you'd like. I'm going to reload this. So let's live in a world where here's the bat X projections. Let's live in a world where you're playing 3-mans, 5-mans, whatever, and a lot of people are going to be playing the bat optimal or something close to it. So I'm gonna click this. I'm gonna see what is the bat optimal as of right now. Obviously, no starting lineups are in, no umpire data is in. I mean, this is something that you'd be doing in about 10 minutes before lock, right? Not now. So I'm gonna take a look at this. I'm gonna go, okay, here's the bat optimal. I'm gonna save this lineup to show it in here. Okay, if I can expect my opponents, maybe in my 3-man, to have Vogelback, Cruz, Sawinski, Acuna, Buxton, Ramirez. If I'm expecting to see this lineup, I know for sure I'm going to see this lineup or something similar to it. Maybe let's build 10 lineups. The top 10 bat optimals. And we're just assuming that if everyone used the same projections. Okay? So now here, you get Sawinski in 10 lineups, O'Neill Cruz in 10 lineups, Minaya and Cortez in 10 lineups, Buxton in 9, Wilson Contreras in 9. Okay? So maybe Maybe someone plays this lineup. Maybe someone plays the next lineup, right? What's the difference between these two lineups? Okay, we got Minaya Cortez, Rengifo. We got Jose Ramirez. Is there any? What's the difference? Acuna versus Ohtani. Is that the only difference between these two lineups? I believe so. So basically, here's the lineup with Acuna at 115.18. Let's unsave that. And this one is 115.12 with Ohtani. This next one has Whit Merrifield at second instead of Rengifo and plays Brian Reynolds instead of Ohtani or Acuna. So you're paying up more. So you're not paying $2,200 at second base. So this is just a 2v2. Then this lineup has Trout in it. So it's very similar to the first one, just with Trout in the lineup. Right? Nothing else is different. You have Cruz, Sawinski, Vogelback. Here's a lineup with Sal Perez in there. Right? Sawinski, Ohtani, Buxton. Like, these lineups all look very similar to each other. Right? Here's Soto in this lineup. Story. But you still have O'Neill, Cruz. You still have Sawinski. You still have Vogelback. You still have, here's Bader in this lineup. Right? But all these lineups look very similar. But what's the common thread between them? Sawinski, Cruz, Minaya, Cortez, obviously. 9 of 10 have Buxton. 9 of 10 have Contreras. 8 have Jose Ramirez. 8 have Vogelback. 7 have Rengifo. And then you get to 5 to Ohtani. And then you get a bunch of 2s and 1s. So let's just say, for instance, I'm gonna run this like this. So we're gonna save this lineup, 115.18. Now let's say I don't play Sawinski. Okay, what's the best lineup, regardless of stacking or anything, that I could play without Sawinski, based on these projections? 114.57. So you're sacrificing 0.5 or so to not play Sawinski, and you're playing Bader. You're playing Buxton, Ohtani, Bader, Cruz, Ramirez, Rengifo, Vogelback, Contreras, Minaya, Cortez. It still looks like these lineups. These are very correlated players to each other. We're going to have a lot of Buxton, Ohtani. Maybe Bader isn't as correlative. So who's the next highest correlative player outside of the pitchers? O'Neill, Cruz. So we're going to get rid of O'Neill, Cruz. And what's the best lineup with that? Okay, now the projection goes down 1.5 points. Okay, so you're sacrificing those projections. Let's take a look at the lineup. Contreras, Vogelback, Rengifo, Hayes, Bogarts, Bader, Soto, Buxton. Okay, so now you're getting a little bit different. You still have Contreras, still have Vogelback, still have Rengifo. You still have Buxton, right? But the less used players in here are Soto, Bader, Bogarts, Hayes. So now you're at a 4v4. Is this enough? Like, this is the question that you have to ask. Okay, I've sacrificed those. I'm not playing Sawinski and Cruz. But I'm still playing Vogelback. I'm still playing Contreras. It's a 4v4 of batters. A 4v4 on the lineup because you're still playing the 2 chalky pitchers. Should I be playing this lineup or should I be playing even more uncorrelated lineup? Maybe in a 3v3, maybe in a 3-man, this is fine. Maybe in a 5-man, it may not be enough. Maybe in a 10-man, it's too little, right? You need to be more uncorrelated. Maybe in a 100-man, you don't want a 4v4. You'd rather have a 6v6 or more. So that's what I'm trying to figure out of, like, what level do you play? So, like, let's say we went to the next most correlated player in this lineup, Byron Buxton. 112.97 right now. We get rid of Buxton. We don't really sacrifice that much projection. We get rid of what? 0.13? So that's no problem. I have no problem not playing Buxton now. Let's take a look at this lineup. We still got Contreras, Vogelback, Rengifo. We get Ramirez back into our lineup. We have Luis Garcia, Trout. So we're still at a 4v4. Contreras, Vogelback, Rengifo, Ramirez. Right? Everyone else is lesser in lineups. I mean, it's not like Trout's going to be not owned, but lesser owned. So we're still at a 4v4. So what happens if we take out Contreras now? Right? Because I'm looking at who is in the top 10 lineups or top 20 lineups, top 50 lineups. Right? Okay, take out Contreras. He's a 9 out of 10. So now I'm going to take out Contreras, 112.84 currently. If I don't play Contreras, we go down to 112.46. Are you fine with only 0.4 projection difference to get rid of Contreras? I am. So now let's take a look at our lineup again. Still got the same two pitchers. Garver, Vogelbach, Rengifo, Ramirez. We got Brian Reynolds in there now. Okay, he's not part of our top. I mean, he's in there as 1 out of 10, so that's not as correlative. So now we're down to Vogelbach, Rengifo, and Ramirez. So we have a 5v5. If these are going to be chalkier players in your lineup. Well, can we get even rid? How much more projection can we get rid of? Let's go to Jose Ramirez. Get rid of him. 112.46 drops down to 112.28. Barely what? A fifth of a point? Seems fine to me, right? I don't mind dropping that. So now we're down. Now we got Ohtani back in our lineup. Okay, so Ohtani is going to be a little bit because he came in 5 out of 10. So maybe I don't mind Ohtani that much. Garver, Vogelbach, Rengifo, Hayes, Bogarts, Reynolds, Soto, Ohtani. Okay? So let's say we take out Vogelbach. It's like, okay, Vogelbach is going to be chalk at first base based on this. So a lot of lineups that have Vogelbach will have other similar players in it. So I get rid of Vogelbach. 112.28 drops down to 112.2. 0.08 difference in median projection. Bye-bye, Daniel. Bye-bye, Vogie. So I get Ohtani there now. I get Bader, Bobby Witt's in the lineup now. Rengifo is still there, right? So Rengifo is a 7 out of 10 shows up. So let's see what happens when we get rid of Rengifo. We go from 112.2 down to 111.96. So we're giving up about a quarter of a point. I'm fine with that. Sounds good to me. Okay, we're getting Merrifield now. We're getting Ohtani, Bader, Reynolds, Trout. Still got the same two pitchers. Let's say get rid of Ohtani. How much projection difference do we get rid of if we get rid of Ohtani also? 111.98. 111.71. Okay, quarter of a point. Fine with me. Now take a look at this lineup. Cortez, Minaya, Perez, Kirilloff, Merrifield, Hayes, Bogarts, Bader, Reynolds, Soto. You have no players. You essentially have virtually no players. Some of these players may be in one of the lineups that have like 5 of these guys in it. But you're not going to have like people that have Harrison Bader in their lineup most likely have like Jose Ramirez in third base. And they have Vogelbach at first base. And they have Contreras at catcher, right? So this lineup is 111.71. Now, obviously, there's no correlation in the lineup. If you're playing larger field, if you're playing the 121, probably you're still playing a 5-man. You take a look at this and you go, okay, well, what happens if we don't play Cortez? Okay, let's see what the lineup looks like. 111.71. We drop only 1 point. So even if you wanted to get rid of Cortez, you could do that. But let's say you just keep the pitch, whatever the most optimal pitchers you just keep. Like this lineup right here, we save it. Right? I'm gonna bring everyone back. And what's the bat optimal is 115.18. Save both lineups. Like basically if so many lineups are going to look like this, maybe not exactly this lineup. Maybe they'll have Ohtani here. Maybe they'll have Trout. Maybe, it'll be Brian Reynolds instead of Jack Sawinski. I mean, like, there'll be some combination, probably a 2v2 or a 3v3 off of this type of lineup. This lineup projects for 3 points, 3.5 points lower or something. Yeah, it looks 3.5 points lower. How often does this lineup, this lower lineup, beat this lineup? Okay? Because if let's say this lineup, based on 4 points and 3.5 points in projection, let's just make a case. This lineup is not maybe 50, let's just say 55-45. I don't think it's that much. I think it's something more like 50, 52, 53, 47. Something like that. So if this lineup wins in a head-to-head battle 45% of the time against this lineup above here, which in a head-to-head is horrible. If you're only getting paid as a head-to-head and you're playing a lineup that only wins 45% of the time, you're not profitable. But what happens if you're playing a 3-man where you get double your money, right? You get 3x or a quintuple up, a 5-man where you get 4x. It's like, well, when this lineup beats this lineup, it probably beats, it most likely beats most of the 2v2s and 3v3s of this lineup also. Right? Right? If O'Neal Cruz and Sawinski, if 4 of these guys don't do very well, they put up 3 points, 0 points, 5 points, and you could beat it out by 10 points or something. Like, even if they're playing a 2v2, if they're playing, oh, no, they're not playing Ramirez, they're playing someone else in this. Like, most likely, you beat most of the lineups that have this container of players, especially when all those players are correlated to each other in a lot of lineups in your contests. Alex says, what about everyone else but Rengifo? I mean, you could, dude, you could do anything you want here. So, like, let's say we did that. Just didn't play Rengifo. Right? But you're still getting, you're getting Contreras, Vogelback, Ramirez, Cruz, Sawinski, Buxton. Like, this is still just, this is a 2v2. Essentially, it's Reynolds and Merrifield that are different. To me, it's not different enough. To me, why wouldn't having this, because to me, 3.5 points of projection, right, in baseball is not much. So why wouldn't I want to play the second lineup? In a 3-man, not in a head-to-head. I'm not talking about head-to-heads, and I'm not talking about double-ups or 50-50s. Okay? Double-ups, 50-50s, non-progressive payout contests, you want to play, you want to be duplicated, right? You almost prefer to be duplicated. It actually helps your equity. In progressive payout contests, it hurts your equity, being duplicated, being correlative, having your lineup being too correlative with the rest of the field. So is this good? Is this fine? If we were to simulate this out, if I were to build the top 10 lineups like I just did, the 10 lineups that I did before that were just the top 10 optimals of the bat, and then ran a simulation, how often does this lineup that I built that has none of those players in it in total beat those other lineups? And I'm assuming the distribution is going to be bimodal, if you want to say. Not really bimodal, more like curved like this, a reverse bell curve. There's not going to be a bell curve because if this lineup beats one of these lineups, it probably beats most of them. So when it does score well, it comes in first, second, or third out of 10. When it doesn't score well, it typically comes in 8th, 9th, or 10th. Rarely comes in 5th. Right? So if we actually simulated that out, and if that is the case, wouldn't this be a much more profitable lineup to play in a field where you know what the lineups are going to look like? Maybe not exactly, but you know what they're going to look like to some extent. This is getting back to that poker explanation of how do you beat average players? Like if you could predict how they're going to react, what they're going to raise with, what positions, what do they check here with? What do they like? You could make better decisions. You can make profitable decisions exploiting that. So people are more likely to be building lineups, and they're mostly just playing against each other. So it's like, okay, it's a 3-man, and everyone's a 2v2, and whichever one's 2v2 wins, and then you win. Is there a way to exploit that? I mean, I know there is because people do it. But what would be the best way of doing so functionally? Me yesterday, I didn't get this different. I X'd out like 2 or 3 players. I texted out the players that actually did well. O'Neal Cruz, Taylor Ward, right? They did well. And then played that lineup. And then I saw in my 3-mans and 5-mans that, like, yeah, now I'm still just a 2v2 or a 3v3. Right? I still basically have the same lineup, just with Jared Walsh and someone else, and Riley Green in my lineup. So I don't think I got different enough. Would I have won regardless? That's not the point that I'm making. I don't care about the result. Once I saw the lineups that were in the contest, I'm like, no, I did not get different enough. FanDuel, I got a little bit different enough. And even then, I didn't get different enough. I think BK Reader pretty much had the same exact lineup that I had in those contests. So maybe he's doing something similar. So that's what I'm pondering here. Alex Santi says it's fine and plus EV, but is it max EV? Yeah, that's the point that I'm making. It's not about whether or not it's plus EV. It's whether or not it's if this would be higher expected value. The 2v2 has such a low dupe probably, but the rest of your lineup is still correlated with the rest of other people's lineups. Like, just think functionally that, like, if for instance, Jose Ramirez and Daniel and Wilson Contreras don't do well, most lineups that have one or the have both of them in it. Not many lineups have only one. Like, so many of the lineups are going to have like 5 of these players in it. So if 2 out of the 5 do badly, like that kills like all the lineups, even if Jose Ramirez does do well. Let's say Jose Ramirez puts up 20 points. Okay? Let's say Jose Ramirez puts up 20 points, and let's say Byron Buxton puts up 20 points. Let's just say we're making up a scenario. But Rengifo has a 0, right? The Pirates don't do well. These guys have 3s and 5s or something. Contreras has a 0. It's like, oh, well, I don't have Ramirez and I don't have Buxton. And I'm competing in a 5-man, and 2 or 3 of my opponents have Ramirez and or Buxton. But they also have the 0 from Rengifo. They also have the 0 from Contreras, because they're more likely to have those players in their lineups also. My lineup, like, dude, no one has these players. And it only, this lineup in whole only projects 3.5 points lower in median. So if Bogarts does well and Merrifield does well, none of the lineups have these guys in it. Soto puts up the same amount of points as Buxton. Then what does it matter that Buxton put up 20? No, it doesn't. I got a 20-point guy in my lineup. Being that the lineups you're playing against are so much more duplicated and correlated to each other, to me, it would make more sense to play the highest projected lineup that correlates the least. And the fact that Daniel says that this is kind of part of his algorithm, so I have to be on the right track. It's just a matter of how do I get there. I think Nerdy Tenor has a better way of getting there. He has a more precise way of getting there. But I think this way, I mean, even just simply doing what I just did, assuming this is all assuming you can predict the lineups. Like I said, this is all based on the back projections. What I would suggest, if you wanted to really do it, is grab projections from around the industry so you know what other people are doing, right? If people are playing this site's optimal and that site's optimal, they're playing an aggregate of all 3 together. And what does that spit out? Don't just spit out the top lineup, spit out the top 5, the top 10. And then see what players between all of these lineups, you spit 5 from this, you spit 5 from that, you spit 10 from that. You have like 50 lineups, and you see what's the biggest overlaps between all of these lineups. And then you start Xing out players and making sure you're not dropping ridiculous amounts of projection. In the case that it's a 13-game slate, so it's easy to find guys that also project well because there's so many more options. On a 5-game slate, sometimes you take out Trout and you drop 3 points in projection because there's no one else available. Maybe then you just like, maybe I should still play Trout. Maybe giving up 3 points just for Trout getting out of my lineup isn't worth it. I don't know what that line is. That's what I'm trying to find out. Beat Nerd TV says, would the side of yesterday's slate alter your decision-making process? Would you have X'd out the same players if it was a bigger? Not, I would have done the same with that. I mean, I don't think I did enough yesterday. I X'd out. I think I should have been even more different, regardless of the results. Once I saw the lineups in my 3-mans and 5-mans, I'm like, no, I'm still just a 2v2 or a 3v3. Like, I want to be minimum of 4v4. And the size of the slate matters only because the opportunity cost. The smaller the slate, the less options. So the more you start Xing out good projected players, your projection is going to come down more and more because there's not as many options. We see with this lineup, it's like, well, what's the difference between Soto and Buxton? Not much. But there's a lot more of those guys. I mean, like 5K outfielders, it's a 13-game slate. There's tons of them that all have the ability to put up points. Their projection difference is the difference between 10.5 and 12. You have like 14 guys that have a projection between like 10 and 12 points. And everyone's going to play like 2 of them. And there's 10 that not many people are going to play because of a quarter of a point in projection. Only because it's a 13-game slate. A 4-game slate, how many of those players are there? There aren't as many. So maybe it's much harder. On a 4-game slate, being an 8v8 is probably much harder. In order to be an 8v8 on a 4-game slate, you're probably giving up 10 to 15 points of projection. And maybe then that's a little too much. Maybe then that's too. Maybe then you're fine with a 3v3. But on a 13-game slate, why shouldn't I be playing this type of lineup? In 3-mans and 5-man. Remember, I'm talking about 3-mans, 5-mans, 10-mans, stuff like that. Less than 100 people, even 100-mans. Less than 100. We're not talking about large field GPPs, and we're not talking about head-to-heads or double-ups. Right? Those contests, your equity actually benefits from correlation. From correlated lineups, not correlation inside of your lineup. Daniel says, sounds like the bigger the slate, the easier it would be to execute this kind of approach. Yes. The only other question past this is that if you're playing, let's say, 100-man top 12 pay, would this be good enough, or would you still rather have a stack? Like, we just X'd out, like, for instance, these correlated lineups. Right? This lineup right here. So let's X these. I'll show you what I mean. So once we X'd out the most correlated players, okay, where are we going? Let's get rid of that. Well, actually, let's put it back there just so we have a reference. Where am I going? Go to my bill. Okay, these are saved. Okay, now I know where I'm going. Okay, so we X'd out those players, so let's X them all out, right? Let's get back to the lineup that we made. Byron Buxton, Contreras, Ramirez, Vogelback, Rengifo, Ohtani. All right, we should get that second lineup right now. Right, there we go. Okay, so we got it. But this has no stack in it. So, like, let's say you're playing the 121. Like, should you just play this? It's the least correlated lineup to the most, to the field, or should you just play a 5-man stack? Just 5x it. Right, do something like that. Build one lineup. And just play this lineup. Because it's the least correlated lineup to the most used players, but it's also a 5-man stack. So you're playing Cortez, Minaya, Kirk, Bell, Hernandez, Devers, Garcia, Bader, Cruz, Soto. That would be the highest projected bat lineup. So I save that. So which lineup would be better to play? Because this lineup projects for 1.5 points higher, but it has like it doesn't have really correlated. 2. It's not really a correlate. It's not a stacked lineup. Would you rather just play this instead? Or is it the type of thing where this is the lineup that you play in 3-mans and 5-mans, and this is the lineup that you play in 100-mans and above? So you at least have a stack in there. Alex says I play 4x and 10-mans on FanDuel. That's what I did yesterday. I ended up with the Blue Jays. So that's what I did on FanDuel. But on DraftKings with 5-man, like, would you do this? Or my intuition says that in 3-mans and 5-mans, you play this. You play the uncorrelated. You play just a non-stack lineup. But in, like, if you're playing 100-mans, you play the 5-man, 5 and 3 one-offs. You don't even play a 5-3, just whatever. Because this lineup is not correlated to any of these lineups up here anyway. Right? I mean, like, it doesn't matter. That's what I would think. In the more progressively, remember, 3-mans and 5-mans are still progressively paid out contests. They're smaller. They're the smallest field. 10-man. You could get away with playing some messy lineup in a 10-man contest and win 1 out of 10. You could play cash lineups practically. But maybe not in a 100-man. 100-man, maybe you'd just rather have a stack. A 5-man on DraftKings, a 4-man. Like 4, and just do 4x on FanDuel. Like, it doesn't have to be 4-2 or 4-3. Just 4x, just like here in 5x. Doug Montgomery says, I play FanDuel 100-man top 12 a lot. 4-2, I would say, is most popular. BK Reader uses a lot of 4-2. Okay. Daniel says, I could run a sim and see what it spits out, although it's not exploitative. Okay. And Alex says in 100s and 20s, I usually run 4-3X and 3-3-2s and 4-4s could come organically. Okay, that's FanDuel. But this is the problem. I mean, this is, to me, I enjoy these types of puzzles. Do I have the answers? I don't know. I think in theory I do. In practice, I don't know. But this is what this show is all about. DFS strategy. If we knew that our opponents are playing very similar types of lineups, what can we do to exploit that? In cash games, double ups and head-to-heads, there's really nothing you can do. If you believe they have a better projected lineup, you should be playing them. We talked about it yesterday about duplication. In non-progressive payout contests, duplication helps your equity. In progressive payout contests, duplication hurts your equity. And most people think in terms of duplication of the full lineup. But what happens to duplication of 9/10 of your lineup? If one is true, the other has to be true as well, just mathematically. If you're playing against two players, let's say we were playing against two players and one of your opponents in the three-man was playing this lineup right here. Right? Vogelback, Crew, like whatever this lineup is. Which probably isn't even the bad optimal. Well, let's just say they were playing this lineup. And your other opponent was playing this exact lineup, but instead of Buxton, they're playing Ohtani. Do you want to play, I'm going to get different. I'm going to play all the same players and then play Trout instead. If I knew that my other two opponents are playing the same exact players with a 1v1, wouldn't my best bet at beating them all, beating both of them at once, is to not play all seven of these guys? I'm not saying to not play any of the seven guys, but at least you wouldn't play all seven. You wouldn't duplicate that and be a 1v1 off. You'd want to be more different, less duplicative. But how much do you need? That to me, I believe I'm correct when it comes to the duplicative factor. That no, in 3-mans and 5-mans, you don't want to be a 1v1. You don't want to be a 2v2. You want to be like a 3v3 or more, but like at what's too much? That I don't know. That's what I'm trying to figure out. Daniel Hutchins in the chat running Sims. Love to see it. Running 100-mans on yesterday's DK 8-game main, my non-exploitive process gives the following stack percentages. Using the $10 100-man DK structure. A 5-man stack, 82%. Stack 4, 17%. So like so I think my that would mean that I'm right. That in 100-man, that essentially in 3 and 5-mans and 10-mans even, you'd play the messy lineup, just that lower projected that is the least correlative to other lineups. But for like 100-mans or above, play that type of lineup just with a 5-man stack or something. Okay. I think that's what we're talking about here. Okay, so I need to mix it up. That makes me want to go into my DK app and split it up. So I guess I'm making 2 lineups on DraftKings tonight. I'm going to try this out. This is the thing also from a time perspective. If this is profitable, it could be just as profitable. Maybe, yeah, I don't have a 50K win or anything like that, but I also don't have to take that much time. Like this is the type of thing where I could do in 5 minutes rather than spend an entire hour building 150 lineups or something. Or spending half an hour building 300 lineups and then weeding and trimming and whatever. So, like, if there's an edge here, why not take advantage of it if the time cost of it is low? You know what ends up happening a year or two from now? Everyone tries doing this. And then now you're playing a poker game. Now you're playing, well, who's going to play this and who's not going to play that? And then at that point, then you move on to something else. Daniel Hutchins is running the Sims on the 3-mans. Okay, I don't know if we have time for that. We have time for thummy thumbs. Give me those thummy thumbs on your way out the door. Some people aren't interested in this stuff. I saw some said like, "Oh, well, we're going to talk about the baseball slate." We technically are talking about the baseball slate, and they're going to be breaking down all 13 games for you at 5 o'clock Eastern time. So on this channel, Dean and the guys. Then you got Crunch Time after that, presented by FanDuel. Grant, 2 o'clock on the Scores and Odds channel, 2 o'clock Eastern time, going over all prop bets. He found Andrew Benintendi, 25-1 to steal. Hope you guys bet on that. I can't legally bet in my state, but that seemed off to me. Plus 2,500 for him to steal a base against Noah Syndergaard, who lets anyone steal a base. Daniel Hutchins Sims says the 3-man results are all over the place. Okay. So the 3-man results don't matter as much. Okay, so that reconfirms. I think that at least gives me a little bit more solace in knowing that, my intuition, my theoretical intuition is directionally accurate. That, yeah, the messy lineup in a 3 or 5-man is perfectly fine. Especially knowing that you're playing against other lineups that are probably not stacked either. So does the correlation matter that much in the 3-mans and 5-mans? Probably not much. But that's a common concept in general. The smaller the contest gets, the less that correlation will matter as much, versus the higher, the larger the contest gets. So it does make sense. It does make some type of mathematical, conceptual sense. So that's what I'm going to continue to do. I'm going to be doing that tonight, and this is the way I'm going to play MLB DFS, at least for the foreseeable future. So I don't have to go nuts when I have to build like 7 million lineups and build 8 million stacks and do leverage scores and do all of that, which is fine. I can be profitable that way too. But in beating into my head of like, where are the edges? Where are the edges? Where are the edges? Find the edges, right? Find the most profitable edges for the least amount of time. And then just find as many of them as possible. And that's the time that you add. So that's what I'm trying. I'm trying to do what I say, not what I do, or the opposite of that. Instead of just saying, well, I guess I'm just going to play 100 lineups on FanDuel today, right? Which I'm still plus EV doing that, but maybe there's a better way of spending the time. Okay, so hit that thumbs up button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, hit whatever you want, and I'll be back tomorrow, right? I'm here all the time, weekdays, 11 o'clock in the morning, Monday through Friday, answering your DFS strategy questions like I always do on the DFS pregame show on RotoGrinders.com.